Hello, welcome back to the setup from my Scythe video. Now today is going to be me talking about the Iron Harvest game, and then after that we'll talk about something else. But so yeah, we're back to this setup. Also, this is going to be the type of setup I'm going to have with all other videos. Not really because they're all going to be involved with Scythe and somehow, but just I kind of like the setup. But anyway, so Iron Harvest. Iron Harvest is pretty much the video game version of Scythe, and normally when board games and things are like transferred into video game format, they often change quite a lot of the you know the mechanics and the lore and so on. Now for Iron Harvest, that's true to some extent, but oddly enough, playing the board game and then playing Iron Harvest is oddly, what's the right term? Oddly familiar. Now to explain, Iron Harvest, unlike Scythe, really has like a much tighter focus and only focuses on like three of the factions and has like a much smaller scope and story. But otherwise, the gameplay mechanics are utterly the same, if not eerily familiar. But anyway, so Iron Harvest. What is it about? Well, it follows the same basic premise. It's been 5 years since 1915 when the Great War started. It's now 1920. And at this point, everyone is expecting the war to end soon. There's a ceasefire happening all around. And everyone is looking forward to a time of peace until all of a sudden, Russian forces attack a Polanian village and begin and try and kidnap a scientist because he has access to the factory, the city state that produces all of the tech in the world. Now, interestingly enough, that's pretty much where that's pretty much where the similarities end, and at that point the story differs quite a lot, like changes quite a bit. But otherwise, yeah, the backstory is the same. It's just the overall plot is a bit different. But anyway, so now that we have the backstory out of the way, what is different about the game? Well, unlike the board game, Iron Harvest focuses on only three factions. Firstly, you got the Rusviet Union. Then you have the Polanian Republic. And then you have the Saxonian Empire here. Ooh, dang. I accidentally scratched myself with it. But, yeah. So with this new renewed focus on only three of the factions, it actually allows the game to expand on the qualities and details of those factions and so on, or these countries in this case. And then not only that, but it allows us to explore gameplay mechanics that we wouldn't have been able to have in the board game. Like, firstly, the game gives each of the armies so many different units that all correspond to like the unique traits of the country. Like Polania's forces are all fast and nimble and like easy to produce. Russian forces are all bulky, powerful, and utterly devastating early game. And then Saxonian forces are late game masterpieces that, if used correctly, will utterly devastate everybody. That is, if you don't kill them in time. So, yeah, that's the largest difference. But what else? Oh yeah. So, let's go into something else. How do you play Iron Harvest? Well, basically, Iron Harvest is pretty simple to understand. It's a game where it's kind of like those real-time strategy games where, you direct forces to a unit, you have all these little squads and mechs that you have to control and send them to different areas to commence a strategic goal. Now, off the bat, it is a very simple premise and it's actually quite easy to play. But the difficult bit is mastering it, because the game is actually quite good at making you feel like a commander of like World War One troops. You have to slowly inch your way forward, killing dozens upon dozens of enemy waves each turn. Yeah, and every now and then the enemy gets a chance to like break through your forces and you have to like kill them all instantly. There can be no survivors. And it's just like this very slow, very meticulous um, advance that makes Iron Harvest unique compared to other real-time strategy games, where it actually gives you that feel of like pure pain and suffering as you're meticulously planning your assault. So yeah, what else? Oh yeah. Secondly, the plot lines. You know what? Let's go through each of the plot lines and explain how Iron Harvest pretty much either differentiates or expands on what Scythe has already done. So the first storyline in the game is Polania's faction, where we meet our heroine, Anna Kos. She's pretty much a young, scrappy girl who has, connections with the Polanian resistance, and she works with them in order to, achieve Polanian independence against the Rusviet forces, who are pretty much seen as the main threat in the game's world, even more so than like Saxonian forces or whatever. But in her storyline, her main aim is to find her father, but also figure out and also kill a general who kidnaps her father and rips his arm off. And it's an incredibly simple storyline, but it does a fantastic job of, really immersing the player into the world and how to play properly. You know, the thing is with Iron Harvest is that the game is incredibly easy to lose at. So if you're not planning constantly every single second, you're bound to die at any minute. And Iron Harvest is incredible at doing that. Polanian forces, whilst they're incredibly fast and nimble and cheap to produce, they're not powerful by any means. They're not particularly powerful. They're just jack of all trades, which are fine, but compare when in a fight against, say, Saxonian forces or Rusviet ones, it can make Polanian fighting as Polania a challenge. And so you must figure out how to maneuver against your enemies. You must outthink them like a fox, which was a really brilliant way to start off how you were going to be playing Iron Harvest. Where you're learning how the game mechanics go, and you're playing as what is seen as to be the weakest faction. And because of that, it makes the later experiences with the other two powers, the Rusviet Union and Saxonian, the Saxonian Empire, it makes the experience with them feel a lot more rewarding because because you feel like you're getting more and more powerful. So that's the Polanian storyline, and I think it is an incredibly good opening to the game. Now we come on to the Rusviet storyline, which I feel like allows us to really see just how eerily familiar playing Scythe is to this game, because the main goal of Scythe is resource collection and resource extraction. You got to maintain an economy essentially while you're trying to kick everyone else's ass. That's the thing with the Rusviet storyline. It's not just like trying to kill your enemy off. You literally have to manage and form your own entire economy. You have to capture iron mines. You have to capture oil pumps. If you don't capture them in time, your enemy will, and they'll destroy you because they'll be more economically self-sufficient and ready to destroy you. Which is just a really clever way to extend the difficulty of the game, because you're pretty much having to fund your own military. And so, with the Rusviet storyline, this self-sufficiency priority is made crucial because, if I'm going to be honest, out of all of the three factions, Rusviet forces are some of the worst, but they are the cheapest and fastest to make. You can easily make Rusviet mechs out on an assembly line as fast as possible. You can get your massive mechs, you can get the SERP here, you can get everything you need pretty easily because Russia, the Russia Union's um, doctrine is cheap warfare. But whilst the Russia Union does have the advantage of having forces that are fast and numerous, the problem with them is that they are some of the worst in tactical and strategic terms. You know, playing as Polania, trying to combat against a player in the co-op mode who plays as the Russian Union, the only way that the Russian Union can really defeat you in minutes is because the Russian Union's numerical advantage. You know, they're able to send all their forces at you in the beginning. If you haven't built a steady defense yet, you're screwed. But later on into the game, if you somehow like stall it out, over time the Rusviets advantage slowly dissipates, and until eventually you're able to overpower them, you know, with a much more powerful Tormek versus, say, a Serp or a Grozny. Now, alongside that, the Russia plotline is pretty simple. Whilst Polania is trying to regain its independence against the Russia forces, what's happening in the Russia Union is that there's a secret cabal trying to take over the country behind the Tsar's back. And so it is up to our main protagonist, Olga, and uh, an, and Anna's brother. I think his name is John, I believe. But her main goal is to try and figure out what this plot is, and then, you know, follow the Fenris forces who are secretly leading the Rusviets to, you know, the what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do is just trying to access the factory and try to steal its tech for their own aims. But the Russia plotline is pretty good, except when you're playing some of the missions, you can really feel just how weak the Russia Union's forces are. Like, sometimes I would be desperately having to fight for my troops to retreat because they're of such low quality and are so easy to produce. But it comes at such a drawback because in that storyline, you're mostly fighting against Saxonian forces. And the Saxonian forces are just incredibly powerful, late game especially. And so when you're trying to fight them, it's such an ordeal. And especially at the final mission, which I can never honestly complete. The final mission in the Russia plotline is you trying to invade the factory, which makes sense. Except the Russian forces, like, flaws and all of that, really come to fruition when you're trying to deal with endless swarms of, like, you know, Rusviet forces. We're trying to deal with endless factory machines and repair drones and soldiers. And Rusviet forces are just so easy to destroy and are just so unwieldy that it really just proves that the Russia Union is perhaps only as powerful as it is in the lore because of its massive size. If it wasn't for that, I would expect them to have lost the war to a country like Polania. Now, the final storyline is perhaps my favorite, which is the Saxonian one. So, in the Saxonian plotline, Gunther here has just recently been demoted in the army, not because of a failure of his own making, but because his fellow commander, who is Prince Wilhelm, and the man who is like the heir to the Saxonian throne, was caught committing war crimes, you know, using chemical weapons, killing prisoners of war, you know, being an absolute madman. That, you know, later on, Prince Wilhelm goes on to kill the emperor, and Gunther here has to run away and form his own resistance group, and all that. Now, the Saxonian plotline is my favorite because it just feels like pure World War One fun. And you really just get that feel of just the slow, methodical death that occurs in this type of warfare. where you're trying to slowly kill off your enemy and their forces, take their bases, take the oil and iron deposits, and along the way you could easily get routed and destroyed. I've lost so many troops in that campaign, but it's still easily one of my favorites because of how fun it is. And especially late game, when after you've upgraded your own bases and are able to build even more powerful Saxonian troops and weaponry. Oh my god, when you're able to do that and you're able to pretty much roll over the Russian forces, that is when the fun for me really builds up in this game. And I think the Saxonian plotline is perhaps one of, if not the best uh, campaigns, and also just game modes in general. Now the final, now the whilst all these plot lines are going on, all of them converge in the factory where Olga, Anna, and Gunther have to combine their rebel forces and rogue factions to destroy Fenris and their attempted takeover of the factory, which they succeed in, and it actually results in a pretty cool boss fight where you have to use all of the, the hero characters to kill the Icarus, which is basically a nuclear weapon disguised as a mech. And that boss fight was really fun and really simple, and it didn't feel unfair in the slightest. So yeah, those are the main plot lines. And so far I've explained all the factions and so on, but it really did feel like I was playing the board game itself when I was just playing the video game, because it truly is just a very unique experience. But at the same time, it's just so familiar. You have to do the resource collection, capturing strategic objectives, gaining certain completing certain objectives to move further. It I was able to I was able to win the game because of the familiarity between the board game and the game itself. But what the game really shines on is the tactical warfare side of it. Scythe broadly focuses on the strategic aims, but Iron Harvest is able to do a fantastic job of really emphasizing the tactical prowess that you're able to achieve when playing the game. My favorite moments were, slowly building up my forces as I'm dealing with constant enemy human waves. And so, yeah, let's probably go into the gameplay. In the gameplay, how it works is that you have a couple infantry units and you have to go around, collect some resource deposits, kill off a few stranded enemy units, and then you have to slowly build up your own forces, build a line of defense, and then slowly inch towards your objective. And the game is brilliant in just how easy it is for you to nearly lose everything. In so many different campaign missions or co-op games, I nearly died every single time from the enemy finding a weak spot in my armor and ruthlessly exploiting it. So I'd be dealing with a pincer attack all the time, or just overwhelming numbers. And it was this tactical focus that really invested me into the game. But not only that, but my favorite part were perhaps the different unit specifications and all of the types of armies you could build. Aside from having the super heavy mechs like the Grozny from the Russian faction, the Tur from the Polanian one, or the Kaiser from the Saxonian faction, all of these armies just have such vast stockpiles. The Saxonian forces are known for their quad-legged tanks that are slow but are powerful enough and are pretty fair in use, and they specify and they're all like anti-tank, anti-mech units, and they're very just overpowered and are very well defended on their own. Polanian forces, meanwhile, have one of my favorite mechs in the entire game, the Shmali. which is like this two-legged mech that just carries a cannon that looks like a rifle, and it's able to do artillery charges. It moves completely fast. It is one of my favorite units in the game, and I just love spamming it whenever I play as Polania. Just building an army of Schmalnis. But alongside that, the Polanians have some of the best infantry diversification because they're the faction that has to constantly deal with overwhelming power, so they have to come up with new methods. So Polanian infantry are some of the best in the game because they use rifles and are very good at killing their enemies. Their anti-infantry and anti-mech infantry are also quite as good. Meanwhile, for the Rus Soviet Union, their forces are all broadly pretty terrible, but that's only in like quality. What really matters is the quantity that they can produce while in battle. Their infantry units are some of the worst. Like, they have Russian Vanguard, who are basically like shotgun units, and their shotguns are pretty effective at like very close range, they're but that's only at close range. They don't have the longer range that, let's say, the Saxonian or Polanian troops have. And their mechs. Their mechs are all pretty terrible. They're anti-infantry and... Yeah, just broadly they're anti-infantry mechs. They're pretty good at, in lone cases, but in a general battlefield, you drop them immediately because they are easily some of the weakest. But what makes the Soviet Union stand out is their broad use of rocket mechs. Now, the rocket mechs are basically what you think it is. Mechs that, like, use rockets as artillery. They are some of the best artillery units in game because of just how fast they are and how much devastation they can do to a wide range. And not only that, but there are two other units that make the Rus Viets very good. That being, one, the SERP. The SERP is a completely unique melee mech that uses two giant scythes to destroy other mechs, meaning it is perhaps one of the best anti-mech units in game. But secondly, there's also the Grozny. Now, the Grozny is it's alright. It's not great, but it's pretty good. But what makes it good, especially to use with the Russians, is that they're massive and they're cheap. Meaning you could push out an entire, like, fleet of these things out onto the battlefield and overwhelm and give all of your units, like, protection, because these Groznys will become the main target, giving the rest of your forces a chance to attack and flank. Now, those are all broadly the strengths and weaknesses of each of the factions in the game. And overall, they're all brilliantly designed. Except there's one faction, and it's kind of a DLC. Now, the last faction is Usonia, which, to those who know, it's a faction that hasn't been introduced in the Scythe board game, but has been introduced in the Iron Harvest world. Now, Usonia is basically what it is. It's the United States. And, they're... Actually, wait. Yeah, no, they're just a picture-perfect version of the United States. They're just called Usonia instead of just America. But they are called Americans. So... Yeah, they're basically just the Americans. Now, the Usonians have some of the... They have more of an air combat focus. Like, they have small hovercraft that could easily do damage against infantry and mechs from high above, making them a bit harder to target. They have giant floating artillery barges that could take down enemy mechs. They have drone carriers that allow you to easily dominate the battlefield and destroy anything if you have enough of them. But whilst their air mechs are some of the best in game because of their broad versatility, their ground units are, how do I put this? They're not they're not balanced. Their infantry units are broadly pretty okay. They're pretty average. Their infantry uses semi-automatic rifles, which means they're pretty much on comparison with Polanian forces because they use bolt action rifles. So that means they do broadly the same amount of damage and can do as much range, and they're very versatile. But it's their mechs that really drive a bit of a problem. Firstly, their most powerful mech in arguably the most powerful mech in game is their artillery cannon, which is just this tiny little beetle looking mech that goes into the battlefield and opens up to reveal 3 artillery cannons within it. And oh my god, it is the most overpowered thing. Not because a single one can do tons of damage, no. It's because they are so cheap. They are the first things you can build in game. And, if you're smart, you could easily build an entire army of these things and do tons of damage. If you build like 10 of these Usonian's artillery units, they are easily capable of overpowering any any enemy invasions and attacks. But secondly, their other mech, their anti-infantry machine gun mech, is one of the worst in game. Well, actually, I would call it on par with most Rusviet mechs. But I think the worst one, in my opinion, is probably their 2 anti-mech mechs. Because, actually, no, it's just really one big anti-mech thing. Where it's this weird melee. It's just this weird melee weapon that is pretty useless because that's all it could really do. And then there's this even bigger mech that is actually pretty good because it can use like artillery barrages, it could fire rockets. It's a pretty good mech all round. But what makes Usonia kind of jarring to play as is because it introduces air combat mechanics, which, to be honest, are some of the worst things because they really kind of get really annoying over time. And they are very unfun to use. I never build them personally because they're just a waste of resources. And yeah, they're just not great. They're not good. So, what else? Oh, yeah. The final thing I kind of wanted to touch on a bit was about, generally, is the game good? Yes, I would say the game is pretty good because, firstly, it has a great storyline, very good campaign that feels pretty fair when you're playing it, and you can really experience like the sort of World War I feeling that many real-time strategy games kind of lack, where you can focus more on the tactics. 1, 2, the art design and the mechs are some of the best in game, and I think they are pretty much the main focus and main vocal point of like why people play the game and why it's fun. The co-op, there's a co-op feature that allows you to play against other players, and that's always fun. There's a skirmish mode and a world campaign mode that allows you to play on your own against AI factions, and it's actually some of the best content in game. And yeah, past that, the game is just broadly pretty good. Now, I would suggest that you play with other people because over time it can get pretty run and dry, which is a bit of a shame because I think it's a great game and I would keep playing it, but I can understand why some people like log off over time. But yeah, so with Iron Harvest talked about, that's broadly all I have to say regarding Scythe and Iron Harvest, and then we'll get over to some new topics. But at the end of this, I kind of wanted to just say that I wanted to thank everybody for their support for my channel, in recent days and months, and how I was able to get a pretty tight and small community that I really do appreciate, you know. And, but I think this time, I think from now on, I'm going to start acting a little bit more seriously in how I approach this channel. Not just as going to be a hobby thing, but I am going to genuinely try to grow it. So, subscriber goal. You know what? Let's try to hit 1,000 subscribers. We're already, what, 806 more subscribers there? So yeah, please hit the notification bell, leave a comment down below, press the like button. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for listening to me. Have a lovely day.